I could change a single memory, I'd call in sick and spend time with you. 'Cause these are the days to remember. These are the days to remember.
The Deconstructionist podcast is produced by Nicholas Rowe at the National Audio Preservation Society Recording Studio in Newark, Ohio.
Follow us on social media at www.thedeconstructionist.com, on Facebook at Deconstructionist Podcast, Twitter at DeconstructCast, and Instagram at Deconstructionist Podcast.
If listening to this podcast has benefited you in any way, consider making a donation. The donate link is in the show notes, or you can visit our website and click the donate tab. Welcome to the Deconstructionist. That was loud.
Boom.
Dang. Welcome to the Deconstructionist podcast, everyone.
He is your host, Adam Narlock.
And he is your host, John Williamson.
See, we switched it up. A little variety.
little variety. And boy, is this episode a little variety. For all you people out there that want to really take a plunge with a worthy, wonderful guide into some really fun, nerdy stuff about theology to really expand your minds theologically without completely losing you. Man, this is a treat.
Yeah. Who do we have this week?
The wonderful, the beautiful, the intelligent, the strong Catherine Keller.
Dude, she wow. She might melt your brain.
Yeah. Yeah, there'll be some brain melting.
So the cool thing about the book that we talk about with her before I get in a little bit of her bio is that she brings in the idea of quantum entanglement, right?
Yeah.
So she brings in this complex scientific theory into theology in this really unique kind of cool way that I think is very, very unique. But as we said, Dr. Catherine Keller, she is a professor of constructive theology at the Theological School of Drew University. And she's also a lecturer, a writer, and she's got quite a few books out. The one that we really talk about is her latest book called Cloud of the Impossible, Theology and Planetary Entanglement. That's absolutely insane. So
it is amazing. Catherine is so brilliant. I just don't even have words. She's just she's wonderful to speak to. And the reason that John and I wanted to have someone like Catherine Keller on is because most of us grew up in a tradition that there is theologians or people that go to seminary or people that think theologically or think about God and write about God really just kind of fall into a couple streams. You know, you've got some Protestants, you got some Catholics, you know, a little variety here and there, but, you know, basically everybody's, you know, down with, you know, all the traditional models of who God is and, you know, what all this means. And there's a lot more to be said out there. There's a lot more imagination. There's a lot more creativity. One of the things we touch on in here, for those of you that find this interesting, and everybody should find this interesting, but it's kind of got some traction lately. Science Mike talks about it a little bit. I've heard the liturgists talk about it. Is this concept of process theology. I'm not going to get into that now, but we talk about that. One of the main reasons I wanted to have Catherine Keller on, outside of the fact that she's just phenomenal, is one of the interesting things in deconstruction for me, and I think for a lot of people, is this idea of mystery, of unknowability.
Yeah,
we're all kind of curing ourselves from this idea of certainty or over certainty or certitude. And one of the things Catherine really latches onto and specializes in her work is this idea of mystery, deep mystery, hyper complexity, that things are so much more than the simple, neat little labels and categories that we've given to them, that we need this, what she calls an apophatic response. That's what the cloud is. The cloud is essentially, it's a cloud. It's not clear. It's hazy. And so the cloud of the impossible is such a beautiful work. And we talk about that. And for me, in my deconstruction, I needed to know that God was so big that our language, our ability to decipher, to put names to, is lacking and needs more space. And that's why I wanted to have Catherine Keller on.
And boy, did she
deliver the goods.
Whoa. So I think not much more needs to be said about that.
Oh, we can just get right to it.
I think so. Without further ado,
wait. A couple warnings.
Yeah.
If you're driving,
pull over. Find a rest stop.
If you're working out at the gym, you're on the treadmill. Put your hands on the railings of the treadmill. May want to put on a helmet for this one.
Yeah.
I mean, this is really, really good stuff, guys. Enjoy it.
Wrap it yourself in bubble wrap if necessary.
I just got a mental picture of you wrapped in bubble wrap with an iPod and like your little earbuds in. You're smiling.
Well, we have talked about my story about falling off the treadmill at the gym before, so maybe
mine too.
Maybe I should.
Yeah, this might be one where you do. Really enjoy this episode, guys. We are thrilled to give you a conversation with a brilliant theologian and our close personal friend, Catherine freaking Keller. Well, Catherine Keller, we are beyond delighted, excited, thrilled to have you with us here on the Deconstructionist podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, I'm immediately picking up that thrill and sense of exuberance you're both communicating about this conversation. So thanks for starting it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So one of the questions that we like to start off with, just so our listeners can get a sense of who you are and kind of the work that you do, if you could, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about your background, kind of how you were raised, and how did you get involved in the work that you currently do?
Mm-hmm. It's not as simple a question as would be convenient. I had a very eclectic background in every sense: cultural, spiritual, geographical. So my family moved constantly, and there was a lot of destabilization in that constant shifting. So rarely did we live anywhere more than a couple of years, and that went on until high school. I had the whole 3 years. That was very fortunate, and after that, I was more on my own and began to stabilize, and eventually got a seminary degree. But the journeys that I went on with my family, though often complicated and difficult in many ways, nonetheless certainly opened me to an enormous and contradictory world of perspectives, of peoples, of cultural viewpoints, of Christianity, yes, Christianity, no, these kinds of it. Occasionally, my stepfather was functioning as a pastor. He had had some background back just after the war. He was Swiss, or as I've recently learned, actually German, but in the Sorbonne, studying some New Testament, but that all cracked down gradually. Nonetheless, there were some really important shards of experience that gave me a sense that there was something I wanted to explore in religion. First of all, I think it was Zen Buddhism that tuned me into how religion could be like really liberating and smart, And I thought, oh, maybe I'll check Christianity out. There's something there too. It was probably a figure in Zen Flesh, Zen Bones saying, that Jesus came very close to enlightenment. So
Amazing.
that was an important cue for me when I was, 16. And it went on from there. I was in Germany then for a few years, for 2.5, studying theology. And that was during the undergraduate years, and then came back and went to seminary, and that's when I started actually finishing things, which wasn't a family practice, but I actually got a degree finally, and really developed a strong sense of connection and commitment to the church. That was the United Church of Christ, and then went on to graduate school. But in seminary, I had just amazing perspectives opened up for me, especially process theology and Paul Tillich, through my professor there, who was Alan Miller. And at the same time, feminism was hitting the scene. This is the mid-'70s. And so I was reading Beyond God the Father by Mary Daly and Rosemary Radford Ruther's first works.
Wow.
And just beginning to put all that together, which was dramatic and iconoclastic, but there was enough support from, really 3 of the male professors. They were all male professors at seminary. Really strong support of my questions, of my adventure, of my soul. From those old guys, and so that's why I stayed with Christianity. Right there wasn't an experience of much defensiveness against these radical new problems arising. There was some of that too, but in interesting forms, not in a simple contradiction of my burgeoning and ferocious 1970s, and the history of patriarchal Christianity. I was very tuned to that contradiction, but it wasn't slapping me in the face. I was encountering really meaningful voices and embodiments of the prophetic side of Christianity.
Wow.
The progressive side. And if I hadn't, I would have been right out of there, because it was a time when, of course, most feminists said, how can you be a Christian and a feminist?
Amazing.
They were also saying, how can you be a Jew and a feminist? How can you?
Sure.
But I experienced the possibility of a third place, not getting caught in apologizing for the patriarchy. Or being in denial of it, but also not needing just to slam the door on the incredible wisdom of the tradition. So then I felt very much lured to Claremont to study with John Cobb, based on reading his Christ in a Pluralistic Age.
Yeah, very, very cool.
Okay. And I think, after that, it starts getting to be a recognizable sort of intellectual journey, integrating the process theology and the Whitehead with the feminism and with other interests that I had, and finding again great support in John Cobb, which I still enjoy to this day. He's 92 and just back from doing some amazing work in China, busy emailing me to keep me up on the politics of United States, China, and Russia geopolitically and ecologically. So that's my old advisor, John Cobb.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I've been really graced with good support from these old guys.
Yes.
And so that has kept my feminism always evolving and
that's great.
Somewhat non-defensive, I think, compared to what it might have might have been. So why don't you ask me what more you'd like to hear?
Sure. No, one of the actually you kind of started to speak about it a little bit. One of the things you brought up is John Cobb's work in process theology. And for those who are listening who are like, what in the world is that?
Okay.
Could you break down a little bit? Yeah, I think it's really interesting. We're both really fascinated by this concept.
Yeah. You don't want me to take the whole 40 minutes on.
Yeah, just a layperson's overview.
Yeah.
A lot of non-academics listening
it
to
is a
this,
little
ourselves
different.
including.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's-
but it is very different. And I really think there's a resurgence of people that are very, very interested in it, even at a popular level.
You're right. The really short answer would be read my book on
And we
Perfect.
encourage everyone to do that. Yes, absolutely.
divinity and process. But there are lots of good introductions to process theology. But it all comes actually out of engagement of the philosopher Alfred North Whitehead, who was one of the great mathematicians of the first half of the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
British mathematician, very tuned to the new developments in physics, just as relativity was breaking and then quantum theory. He was writing his great works and integrating all of this. But what he realized is that the Western modern worldview doesn't suffice. It doesn't hold. It's going to crack up in very destructive ways unless it undergoes some dramatic transformation. And that's what he tried to facilitate. And in two directions. But on the one hand, to take account of the very non-deterministic and non-mechanistic new physics,
Wow.
especially of quantum events, with their radical indeterminacy and interrelatedness, and then the relativity of Einstein that connects the whole universe in a whole fresh way. But he wanted to bring that into philosophical reflection. And at the same time, he realized that the West was in a profound crisis because of its schism between fact, which it leaves to science, and value, which it leaves to religion, and religion in what he considered an increasingly sentimentalized and privatized form. So what he thought his task as he really grew from mathematics into philosophy was, above all, to find a way to integrate religion and science in a sufficient worldview for people to inhabit. Now, he was the son of an Anglican clergyman on the west coast of Britain. So he carried a lot of his Christian background with him, but wasn't writing Christian theology. He was writing philosophy, but it's philosophy that God snuck into, which was why it then didn't become a very respected and widely disseminated philosophy for a very long time, because philosophy was, Heidegger and was Wittgenstein at that time. I hope these are familiar names at least.
Absolutely.
And these had gone in a radically secularizing, if not straightforwardly atheist direction. But he felt like part of this new worldview was opening up, not the death of God, but a glimpse of another face of God. That is, it's not that that the symbol of God is just dying and being replaced by a triumphant scientific materialism, though it sure can seem that way, but rather that we have a chance to understand something about the divine and the divine relationship to the world that had been occluded for many, many centuries, and partly because of the way in which Christianity had developed when it became imperial and imitated in the image of God, the image of Caesar.
Yeah.
As Whitehead puts it, when the church gave unto God that which belonged only to Caesar.
Oh,
Right, right. So there's a deeply political ethic also in this philosophy. But what emerges is a sense of God who is in profound interactive relationship with the universe. And it's a universe that is made up of interactions. That's what it is. It's not made up of things in a void that kind of look at each other from the outside and occasionally collide or glom onto each other.
it's amazing.
It's a whole force field of continual interactive processes. And that's what you are, and that's what I am, and that's what we are right now together. What I am at this moment in process thought isn't exactly the same as what I was before this podcast began.
Oh, that's so good.
You know, and that's true of you too, for good or for ill. You know, this could be a dangerous influence here, this process theology. But what process theology is saying is moment by moment, we are actually evolving in process. And all of my past comes along with me. It's not that, you know, there's just discontinuity. That is all there. All that I have ever experienced, mostly unconscious, is flowing into this moment. But I'm composing myself differently each moment. I'm composing myself. And right now, because you're foremost in my experience, you're becoming part of me as I become part of you. And you always will be, whatever comes. And again, one has to say, for good or for ill, it's not a romantic view. Our relationships can deeply, deeply abuse and hurt us, can poison us.
Right.
But they're also the source of not just what we are, but of what gives nourishment and joy, meaning. So we're all in this constant relationship to each other. And what's crucial in process thought is it's not just human beings with each other, and it's not just, you know, me and my God in a kind of intimate one-on-one. It's all of the creatures of the universe. Right? They're all experiencing. It's a live universe. That's another aspect of the emerging scientific work that Whitehead had brought into play in especially his great work, Process and Reality. That when we're talking about these events of interaction, these events of becoming in relation, we're not just talking about human beings, and we're not just talking about God, who is also in this becoming with us. Talking about every creature in the universe. And that means not just every deer and dog, flower. It also means every quantum electron, every cell of your body, every little number of the billions of microbiota that we now know inhabit us in the microbiome, right? They're all in some way alive. They're not conscious. But to be a creature in this creation is to be alive in radically different ways. And so there is this, you know, just this utterly rhythmic, vibrational sense of the creation unfolding. And God is taking part in it. God is imbibing it. God is calling it forth moment by moment, not forcing anything. Luring is the word. Inviting, but it's called the divine lure. That's the technical term in process theology for the way God's will works. It's not a will that coerces, it persuades. So this divine lure calls forth new possibilities, and we act on them or not, you know, to some degree. Not. It's up to us to be tuned in or not. And sin makes it, you know, what we call original sin is quite a filter, you know, on that lure. So we're very likely just to block it out. But that,
man,
yeah. So that's a bit of an interest. That divine lure is calling us forth moment by moment into newness, into freshness, towards each other, towards our worlds in bigger, more complex, more intense ways, and yet also in ways that retain the sense of togetherness. That's the call, at least. And what about God, who's not coercing it or forcing it or stepping in to do our work for us, just calling it. Well, this is not the traditional God the sovereign image, is it?
Right.
No,
right.
that's actually what I was just about to ask you is, one of the reasons we call this place the Deconstructionists is because John and I became very aware of just our sort of implicit biases and the traditions we were handed, and realized that, to question them, to open them up, to allow them to encounter, as you put it, the lure of the unknown, or the, as maybe in your book, the impossible, the cloud. This seems like it's coming from this process theology, and process versus, what we would have been brought up with is more of a traditional Western Orthodox kind of classic systematic theology. This view of God is different, but I don't think it's, not something we find within the past Christian tradition. And it seems like in your work, you're actually kind of enlivening and bringing back up in freshness a lot of what the Enlightenment sort of quenched.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be a way to sort of understand your work in some ways?
Oh, I think that's a great insight into what I'm trying to do. Yes. I mean, many process theologians work with various, ancestral antecedents. Very often they're working with Scripture. And I often find myself going back to the Bible as well. I wrote that whole book just on basically the second verse of the Bible, which is face of the deep. And we can get into that later if there's time, if you want to. But that's something I share with other process theologians, often looking at Scripture with fresh eyes. Once one gets free of the kind of metaphysical framework that Christian orthodoxy had locked into rather early, which brought it a lot of great insights and the possibility of philosophical thinking out of Greece, but also brought with it, some static categories, like God is the unmoved mover from Aristotle.
Right.
But then that's locked into Christian orthodoxy, especially in the form of Thomas Aquinas, and anything else is a heresy.
Right.
God has to be unmoved, both in the sense of not affected emotionally, but also just not influenced.
Which doesn't even make sense when you look at the incarnation.
Exactly. Or just prayer in the Bible, any sense that there's a dialogue, right? That there's an interaction, that God is responding, is responsive, is feeling, is moved, is compassionate. And that was a big problem in the history of scholastic Christianity. Anselm really struggles, with this. And Todd works on that in his little introductory book, Process Theology and Introductory Exposition, looks at how nobly Anselm was dealing with this obvious contradiction, the sense that, well, God has to be changeless if God is eternal, and therefore, God cannot be changed, be affected. But to be compassionate means basically to feel with the other. Compassion, to feel with. Passion means literally, from the Greek root, to be moved. So if you can't have a God who's moved, you don't have a compassionate God. Anselm really worried about this.
Oh, man.
But his solution was to say, well, God appears to us to be moved, to be compassionate. But in fact, God is just giving us what we need. And in him, of course it's a him, in himself, he is not moved. So that was the solution. In relationship, it appears to us this way.
Man.
So it was a real struggle, right, to try to work with those static categories that came out of Greco-Roman thinking of a God who is eternal in the sense of changeless, of immobile, of dispassionate, of unaffected. All of that's just part of the orthodoxy we've inherited. And then also pure act. That phrase from Aristotle again, that was
right.
Pure act, meaning no receptivity, no passivity, because what? That's passivity, that's passion, that's being moved. And in any way, it's like, women in the stereotype. So you have this purely masculine, pure act, utterly unmoved, that has been enshrined in orthodoxy, and yet all the time, all the scriptural stories, images, poetics, metaphors of a God very, very moved to a wide range of feelings, including anger, and certainly great tenderness, compassion, pity, love, care, hope for us. So process theology has been, in that way, very interested in the way in which Whitehead's categories, where God is in becoming, because why? Because God feels the world.
Yes.
Moment by moment, everything in it, but like every molecule on every planet in every galaxy, God's feeling all of that. It's not leaving God indifferent. It's not irrelevant to God. This boundless universe. It's with whatever 14 billion galaxies, incomprehensible. That's all in God, and God's feeling it all somehow, and that's in this model, and therefore, moment by moment, is becoming with it. It's like the content of God's experience. That's what it is. So God's feeling it, and feeling all of its spontaneities and richness and freedom and craziness and wickedness and sorrow, feeling it all, and luring it to something more, something better.
Man, that is so beautiful. Just unbelievable. I love this stuff.
So we're kind of already going there, but we really want to talk about your most recent book that we both absolutely love right now, Cloud of the Impossible.
Love it.
So we've kind of already gotten into it, but the one thing we really wanted you to talk about a little bit before we really dive into it is the title. The title, Cloud of the Impossible, is one that you borrowed from a phrase that you found from Nicholas of Cusa.
Cusa, yes.
Yeah. And the title alone is packed with a lot of questions and ideas. Could you break that down for us a little bit?
Yeah.
Yes, I think so.
Maybe.
I am working on a different book, but the cloud is still with me. Yes, the phrase, as you say, is from a text of Nicholas of Cusa, who is perhaps the patron saint of that book. And who wrote in the 15th century. And so this is a book from this phrase is taken from a book of his from 1453 on the vision of God. And it occurs, this phrase, the cloud of the impossible, when he's trying to describe this experience of struggling with real contradictions in one's thinking or in one's life. And he was thinking of his theology because, why? He was realizing the contradiction between a God who only moves and a God who is also moved. And he realized you need both. And he realized this was a contradiction to, everything he knew about the faith, about, what was acceptable theologically. So he was thinking, but then sort of having a meta reflection, right, on why these contradictions cut so deeply and where you go with them. And what he realizes is these deep contradictions where there's truth on both sides take you into a dark place, a place where you do not understand, where your cognition breaks down. And he felt there's nothing more important, there's no greater gift than realizing where our ignorance kicks in. And,
that's so good.
And he was a Christian cardinal at this point, but he quotes Socrates, right? Knowing that you don't know, to know that you don't know, right? The beginning of wisdom. So he's pulling that in, and he's pulling in the Christian mystics from Gregory of Nyssa, and especially the Pseudo-Dionysius of the 7th century, a whole tradition of theology that really meditated on the unknowing. That is the deep, mysterious unknowability of God, of what we call God, because they realize that all of our words for God, even God, don't quite hack it.
No.
They turn quickly into little idols. Why? Because we think we understand God. So he found that there's great value in facing our contradictions because they push us into this unknowing. And if we are courageous and we deal with what he thinks hurts, it hurts, and enter into that cloud, there's a luminosity that breaks open from within it.
That's so good. So this is something that we talk around a lot on the podcast, but since we have somebody so gifted in explaining these kind of higher level concepts, I'd love to just utilize that for a second. This idea, I think what you're talking about is apophatic theology.
That's it.
And so if you could just indulge me for a little bit, because your book deals a lot, in my opinion, with obviously apophatic theology and this whole idea. The way I kind of summarized it as I was making notes when I read is, the cloud of impossible is this apophatic entanglement, or this non-knowable and non-separable sort of cloud, this entangled non-knowability. And it seems to me like, you mentioned Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas and Anselm and, pushing towards the Enlightenment to modern day Western Christianity, we've lost and are just kind of starting to reclaim this beautiful need for the apophatic. Could you explain a little bit about what that is to our listeners, this big kind of scholarly word, apophatic theology? Because you were already doing it, but I just want to highlight that. And then kind of how does that play into your work?
Yeah, that word can be a little off-putting, as can the other phrase, negative theology.
Right.
It refers, because of course it's ultimately profoundly affirmative, but the negative here is the sense that anything we think we know about the ultimate, we actually do not know. we and that's the negating, and therefore to get to some wisdom means to recognize that what we feel we know only very tenuously. We don't know in the sense of, a cognitive clench. And this is deep in the Christian tradition, isn't it? This is in Paul, in Corinthians, knowledge puffs up, right? Faith builds up.
Right.
And it's not that Paul didn't have a lot to say, a lot to write, and he felt he knew some things. Indeed, he felt he knew some extraordinary things that maybe no one else could put as clearly as he could, right? So there's no lack of cognitive confidence in theology. He's really creating theology for the future of Christianity. But there's that awareness that knowledge tends to puff us up, to lead to a kind of ego inflation, where we think we know. And then become, complacent in either our mastery, if we're on the dominant side of the hierarchy, or in our submission, in our unquestioning acceptance of what's just dished out to us, if we're more on the receiving side. So there's a whole tradition then that develops with the notion of the cloud emerges first in Gregory of Nyssa. As you know, I have a chapter kind of tracking that cloud history. It's really an exegesis of the cloud over Mount Sinai that God makes a date with Moses to meet him in. Makes that arrangement in advance, meet him in the dark cloud atop the mountain, and that's where he receives the commandments. And then Gregory of Nyssa, 1,000 or more years later, is exegeting that dark cloud in a mystical way in the 3rd century. So a very early church father. And he's the one who really makes the move towards apophasis, negative theology, this realist, because theology was already getting very confident as it developed its philosophical base, and he wanted that humility as built into it. Also, it was developing forms of hierarchy that were perhaps structurally very important and necessary for a young institution, but that could also assert doctrinal claims just with unquestionability. So you have this meditation on the cloud early on, opening up another zone, an awareness that the deep things of faith aren't captured in language at all, and that then develops through a whole history of figures that we won't keep going into now. Pseudo-Dionysius in the 7th century being perhaps the most important, until then figures like Meister Eckhart, 11th century, and very important to deconstruction, and my Nicholas of Cusa
yes,
in the 15th is picking up that whole tradition of the dark cloud, the cloud of unknowing. And what's wonderful is he's doing this right at the dawn of the Renaissance, right? And he's an amazing Renaissance thinker. He's a talented mathematician. He supports the arts in important ways. And he's all about all kinds of knowledge. Indeed, in the same book where he discusses really this apophatic move, the book is called, this another book, an early one, Docta Ignorantia, the learned ignorance, that is learning about our ignorance, learning that we're ignorant so we can really learn. In the second part of that book, an amazing thing happens. Remembering now this is 1440. He is in that second book thinking about cosmology.
Whoa.
Thinking about the universe, and thinking about how it's the universe that's made in the image of God, not just people. And therefore, it must be very close to, it must be as much like God as possible. Therefore, it must be in some way infinite, though not in the divine way. Therefore, if it's infinite, it has no boundary, right? It's boundless. If it has no boundary, you can't find the center. If it doesn't have a circumference, it doesn't have a center. And he takes this further. This is using his apophatic technique of recognizing the contradictions, the unknowabilities, and pushing in. Therefore, he says, the earth cannot be the center of the universe.
Whoa.
This is a century before Copernicus and then Galileo, right? And he goes on in the next paragraph, and no star can be the center, because the universe has no fixed center, right? Who knew that? It's a theologian.
Wow.
Man.
Realized that the earth is not the center of the universe, nor is it fixed. It's in constant motion. We just can't see it because we're relative to it. And
Whoa.
Right. Commentators have commented on relativity. So you can see how, Cusa did hook me. But you see, incredible knowledge, new knowledge is being produced by him because he's so tuned in to his own ignorance.
Man. Wow.
You're never really gonna have control of it all, so you best get cool with where your chips gonna fall. We are the sun in mother's milk, in cuss words and poetry, and there's no use to run unless you run like that. The best things we learn from the wreck. Jesus coming back as a woman this time, headed out hard to the clinic mind. So tell the devil we don't need to know how. We all pretty good at picking up ourselves.
Something we could all learn a great deal from. We're choking on certitude in the West, and especially in the Western Church. And I think this resurrection of the apophatic and mysticism and all these things and the interrelatedness of all of this is something that is just a breath of fresh air. I think John has a question specifically about that.
Yeah. So I think one of the concepts and one of the devices that you use in this book that kind of perked up my inner science nerd, definitely was paying attention. You use this idea that from quantum physics to help explain this cloud of impossibility, specifically planetary entanglement. And I know a lot of people at home are probably like, what? This is a book about theology. How in the world is she tying in planetary entanglement?
Oh, this is so good.
So I was wondering if you could speak about that a little bit.
Oh, I'd love to. And perhaps this way, right? Planetary entanglement is a phrase. It's right in the subtitle of the book that I like. I don't think it is a phrase someone else uses, but the phrase that I'm building on, that I am, as you say, taking right out of physics and of very cutting edge physics, as far as I can keep up with it, is quantum entanglement. And it's this entanglement at the quantum level that became a real clue for me and helped to connect some aspects of process theology and its cosmology, remembering that process thought was already always about, for decades, reconnecting science and religion in fruitful ways. But I thought there is some new insight going on here, and it had weird resonances with with Kuza as well. But let me just say something about quantum entanglement. And it's saying, everyone can just Google and learn lots about. There are lots of good podcasts on it. And I think my introduction in the book is actually pretty good, because I'm not a science specialist. Therefore, I have to work really hard at understanding, and I have to stay in lay language. I don't have a lot of mathematical formulas popping through my mind. So I really had to work at understanding, and I think that's helpful for communicating it. But the amazing thing about quantum entanglement is this is the most radical relationalism that I know of as expressed in science. This is a theory in physics that has now, for the last 30 years, been verified over and over and over in each major test, that really shows that it's true that what the universe is made of is interactivities, processes of relationship, of everything to everything, of anything to anything else. But in a very specific sense, in quantum entanglement. And because quantum entanglement doesn't say everything is related to everything. Process thought says that. Kuza says each is in each and all is in all. But what quantum entanglement shows us is this, that if you take two photons in a laboratory, right? Two particles of, electrons of particles of light, and two photons, and you connect them. That's called entangling them in the laboratory. They then become an entity. Now, separate them again, and off they go, spinning in opposite directions. Now, that's very normal. That's predictable, that they would go off in opposite directions, and that they would go off in exactly symmetrical ways, and at exactly the same angle of spin, just in inverse, right? One direction and the other. And they can keep on moving for enormous amount. An inch is an enormous amount of space for a photon, of course, but they can go on moving for light years apart from each other. And here's the thing. Now, okay, quick quantum thing. So this is what was not surprising when these experiments began to formulate themselves. What's not surprising is that it's a quantum particle, and therefore, when you measure it, right, you can't predict in advance what response you're going to get. That's the indeterminacy.
Yes.
Underneath that makes for quantum uncertainty. That when you measure, photon A, you can't predict where it's going to land and let itself be measured. You can maybe predict the location, but not the speed, or you can predict the speed, but not the location. You can't capture its space-time in a full prediction. So it, in other words, in a certain way, it's responding, let's say, what's called randomly, like a throw of a dice. Okay, that's known. So here's what was so spooky when this thinking began, and this began in the 30s. And Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. It drove him crazy because it seemed to him irrational, mystical, crazy, had to be ruled out. And he never managed to rule it out. This spooky action at a distance, but it haunted him. And what is it? It's this. So you've got photon A and B, you separate them, and off they fly. Now, if you could measure both of them at the same time, each of them is going to react randomly, spontaneously to the measurement itself, right? That's quantum physics. That's quantum physics. That's not a surprise. Einstein accepted that. Each one is going to respond unpredictably to its measurement. But here's the spook. It's that when you measure them at the same time, they react at exactly the same instant, in exactly the same way to the measurement. And yet
amazing.
They have no way of communicating with each other because they might be miles or light years apart. And because this is happening in the same instant, and a signal can only travel within the speed of light. So that's the spooky thing, that two photons, two electrons, two particles, once they have been connected, are never actually separable, no matter how far apart they are. They're still responding as though they're hugging each other.
It's amazing. And the implications for process theology are like, I mean, for a nerd, like, are so obvious and exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, you get it. And it just says something about the creation, doesn't it? If you want to get spiritual about it and about what kind of...
I do. I want to get spiritual, Catherine.
What kind of universe it really is. It's just so much spookier and more interesting than modern science up until very recently had let us know, because it had all the answers, or it would soon. But now we're at a whole new time with quantum entanglement getting just verified over and over. It was just a year ago, wasn't it? Yeah,
I believe so. Yeah. Very recently.
Big headline article in the Times and all about a test that was felt to be very definitive that was done, I think, in the Netherlands. But the tests up till then have all been verifying it. But it couldn't be tested until the 80s because it's incredibly difficult technology. So now we're seeing this spooky connectedness of the universe that, from a certain perspective, it doesn't matter how far apart two things are. Once they've been connected, they're never separated. They're still somehow part of each other. They're still somehow part of the same system. But there's still an immediate contact of some kind that we do not understand, that clearly has something to do with the waves of energy rather than the particles of stuff. So it's saying something about the universe. At the same time, we're getting all this about dark energy and dark matter. So the universe is ending up being a kind of wonderfully mysterious, spooky stuff.
It is. It's absolutely wonderfully mysterious, and I love how you do such an incredible job, a comprehensive in this book, incredible job of weaving together the apophatic, that unknowability, that ignorance, that beautiful ignorance, with all of this new scientific discovery and entanglement. And you even go into things like Walt Whitman and just tying it up into places that you just never would expect to see it before. There's a surprise that's always around every other page reading this book, and we could just go all day. We'd need another 6 episodes to talk about all this. Hopefully this is just a teaser and people go out and start to really mine your work, and hopefully this resurrection or this resurgence of the mystery and the unknown and the apophatic and mysticism, all this kind of stuff serves you well, and hopefully you sell a whole bunch more books because you deserve to. This is really good stuff. I'd like to end with our last few minutes here talking about something that's a little bit more practical for some of our listeners that are probably enjoying this conversation and, all of the implications that there could be. But I think you land the plane towards the end of the book in your chapter after the theopoetics of the cloud. I just want to read you a little snippet here and then just get you to kind of land the plane for us and give us something a little bit practical. You say this toward the end of your book, after all, still, the God question. With one last gasp of theological authority, let me therefore say unto you, that for which God is a nickname cares not whether you believe in God, doesn't give a damn, isn't in the damning business. What matters, what might matter endlessly, is what we earth dwellers now together embody. Not what we say about God, but how we do God. And I think this is where you're getting at theopoetics, which, Pete Rollins and Caputo talk about theopoetics in the way of, it's not just trying to say something that can't be said, because that's what we use poetry for, to try to say something that can't be said. Mm-hmm. But you talk about it in terms of God making. I wonder if you could just end with us by talking a little bit about theopoetics and God making.
Yeah. I really love taking theopoetics back to its ancient sources, really with, again, the Greek fathers and Gregory of Nyssa is right in there. But there the word is theopoiesis. And it does mean God making or becoming God. And the same thinkers who were developing apophatic theology were developing the sense of theopoiesis, and they weren't thinking about poetry. Right. That's a very modern use of theopoetics, and I love that too. But this is something more theologically fundamental. This is what then Athanasius, Mr. Orthodoxy, meant when he said God became human so that the human might become God.
Oh, yeah.
Now that's that becoming divine that is our task, and that Protestantism especially really repressed or eclipsed or lost sight of, or really didn't want the word out about how these Orthodox fathers were into this, because it could seem too arrogant, too uppity.
Yeah.
In fact, I disagree. I think it's a source of the most absolute humility.
Yes, I agree.
So this ancient sense from the patristic period of theopoiesis has seemed important to me to retrieve this becoming divine as our task. Not that I will become God, but that in our entanglement together and with the whole of our planet, and perhaps indeed within that which we nickname God, there is a becoming of the divine. And so that becoming divine, which is God's own unfolding, but which is our unfolding in God, means that in what we do, we better be mindful that we're doing God.
Wow.
And we want to do it well. If we are mindful that in our actions there's some God-making going on, that does call us to a pretty intense sense of responsibility, doesn't it?
Yes.
For our decisions, for our creations, for our actions, for our life together on this very now fragile planet. So finally the way in which the apophatic entanglement lands for me, the sense of a mysterious unknowing that opens us to new kinds of recognition of our interrelatedness. This apophatic entanglement then does land in continuous practice. We're practicing in our talking together. We're practicing.
Wow.
But we're practicing as part of and for the sake of much greater embodiments, aren't we? We're members of something much greater, and that has traditionally in Christianity been our membership, our being members one of another in the body of the Messiah, the body of Christ. And I suspect that the divine lure to us now is to realize that that body is a body that only lives in the healthy body of the planet, of the earth, and that we now have very, very pressing responsibility. It's a time of great urgency. I don't want to say emergency because that makes me panic. We seem, according to climate science's utter consensus, to have approximately a generation to get our act together as a species and to stop destroying our future. So that seems to me now a very sacred calling for theological thinkers, and doing God would first of all be
absolutely
the tikkun, as the Kabbalah puts it, the repair of the wounds that we have made in the creation. But that's also creative and loving and joyous work, not a work of panic, but of a work of pen, of everything. That I'm doing a lot with Paul's Corinthians these days. That God may be panta and panim, all in all.
Mm.
Wow. I can see no better way to end this episode. I mean, that was beautiful. So
so good.
Before we part ways, though, where is the best place for people to go to find your work, keep up on what you're doing? And you did mention earlier that you are working on a new book. Are we able to get a teaser in terms of what that's going to be about?
Well, yes. The book that I think people should start with is definitely on the mystery. And I think it does serve a fairly good introductory function, though I don't imagine it comes off as condescending in any way. But the book that I have a book coming out that's a collection of essays, and actually I think it's going to be really quite accessible, more vivid, because the essays come from a lot of different contexts in the world and over the last few years, and that's called Intercarnations. So that'll be out in a few months from Fordham. But the one I'm writing right now is going to be a little book, I promise. And it is. Right, I just am finishing a draft tomorrow morning, and it's 3 chapters. I'll deliver it as the Taylor Lectures at Yale in February, and then I think it'll be ready to pretty much get to press. And it is called a Political Theology of the Earth. So
wow.
I think you can see that's picking up on the ecological edge of theological thinking, but wanting to keep it politically intense, vibrant, active, so that we do God instead of doing in our future. We do need to find new ways politically, within the system and outside pressing upon it, to bring about the needed transformation. So it's strange to be writing that book right now in this election season, but that, fortunately, is a topic we don't need to get into.
Oh, man. Well, we just want to thank you for your time. I know Adam and I absolutely love the work that you're doing. We think it's vitally important,
Yes.
especially in today's day and age. And we hope a ton of people check out your work. And again, we just want to thank you for the time that you've been able to share with us today.
Well, thank you, John, and thank you, Adam, and thank you to each one of you who might be hearing this. So please do your work, do your God, be in touch.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Catherine. We enjoyed this immensely.
Me too. We'll communicate again sometime.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
sleeping in the lilies, or was I up all night? These days it's hard to tell what's half asleep from fully alive.
Holy cow. You guys still with us? Still intact? That's Adam's impression of our brains after we got done interviewing this particular guest as I kicked the trash can. Wow. I you know what? I just want to comment briefly on what you had said in the intro, and it made me think of the fact that God, to me, in much the same way as kind of finding out about Santa Claus, right? When you're a kid, and then you find out it's just a dude in a costume, and then you're just so disappointed. It just takes the magic away. In that same way, I'm with you. I never have wanted the divine God, whatever you want to call it, to be that human-esque, I guess.
Yeah.
Because if God can be defined and described in human concepts, then it just takes away the majesty, I think, and the power. So if we don't have a God that's beyond our capabilities of understanding, then, you know, what are we, as they say, what are we even talking about at that point? You know, it really brings God down to a very human form with very human limitations, I think.
Absolutely. This whole idea, you know, I'll be very candid. I read a lot of her book.
It's a thick one.
It's not only is it thick, but it's one of those books where one paragraph would leave me just wondering, and I mean this in a beautiful way, things I'd never wondered before.
That's good, man.
And what I love about Catherine Keller is her sharp intellect. She's obviously brilliant is an understatement. She's imaginative. You know, if you've been a listener for some time, you'll find Catherine Keller in the same circles that you'll find a lot of the work by Jack Caputo. And one of the things that I think links the two together is in this unsaying, this deconstructing, you know, whatever you want to call it, there is more space to say things in new ways. There's just it's so freeing to hear somebody like Catherine talk about the ideas of apophasis or mystery or unsayability, which is, you know, something Pete Rollins picks up. It's something Rohr picks up. It's something Tillich talks about. It's something that Jack Caputo talks about. We need this.
Yeah.
We need this. This is, I think, such a part of who we are as the Deconstructionist podcast, is constantly reminding ourselves, constantly reminding our listeners, constantly reminding anybody that wants to listen that language is very, very fickle, and that we need to keep stretching it and pulling it and bending it and creating new space for concepts to live and move and breathe in imagination. And God has to be bigger than the language. So there has to be an unsaying, and then there has to be an entanglement. You know, there's this idea of interconnectedness and how it's all connected. And not only are we connected materially, but ideologically, and ideas are connected, and just this unbelievable, complex, apophatic, mysterious entanglement is just one of the coolest things. I mean, talk about setting your mind free to really just get out there and imagine and think. It's beautiful, and that's why I wanted it to be on this podcast. It's incredible. What a great interview.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, too, because if you look at some of the tradition of many of the world's religions, and you look specifically at the mystics within each tradition, this is something that they've been talking about for a long time. This huge mystery and this unknowable, undefinable, ground of being or whatever you want to call it.
Not worrying about putting words to it.
Yeah.
Silence.
So why try?
How about just silence?
Yeah. So good.
You need to be silent after listening to Catherine Keller do that.
Yeah.
That's what we recommend right now. A healthy dose of silence. So we're just going to stop.
Yeah. And the band this week?
Oh, this is a really cool story. So while I was reading the book, I noticed that she'd start each chapter off with a quote from somebody or someone, old author, new author, something like that. And I noticed that throughout the chapters, and then in a couple of the intros to the chapters, she was referencing this band called the Cloud Cult.
Yes.
And I was like, the book is called The Cloud of the Impossible. And I was like, oh, well, I should check them out. That sounds really cool. And their music is awesome.
And I had already been listening to them and didn't even know it. And you're like, hey, we should use these guys. We should ask them, if they'll let us use their music. And I'm like, okay. So I looked into it. I'm listening to it. I'm like, holy crap, they're already on my playlist. I'm like, and they were so gracious and so nice. And literally, I think their response was, absolutely, this sounds like a very important topic to discuss, and we would love to be a part of it.
How often does a brilliant doctor of constructive theology recommend a band, a kick-ass band, in a book, and that it just blows your mind? That's why you got to love Catherine Keller. Come on now. Let's give it up for Catherine Keller.
Hey! And as always, if you like the band, if you're digging the music, check out our playlist on Spotify. I think I titled it "Music to Deconstruct To."
Oh, good job, man!
Thanks, man.
Nicely done. John deserves a round of applause.
Oh, thanks.
T-shirts still available online. We got a couple left, and a new batch with a brand new limited edition design by another listener.
Yeah,
coming out soon that I think you guys are really gonna like. So check those out in our store. Link is in the show notes.
Yep.
Thank you guys again for being with us on another episode of the Deconstructionist Podcast.
Next week, we continue the theme. We have another guest on that we're really excited about, another lesser-known individual. And so if this was a little hard for you to digest, he kind of discusses a lot of the same concepts, but probably a little bit more of a, digestible way.
Yeah, like a popular approach. This guy's a pastor, and he is academic in nature, but oh man, you guys are really, really going to like this.
So good.
I love that we get to sort of, he had a podcast, and, some people are going to know who he is, but so many more people hopefully are going to know who he is after next week, and I can't wait until next week. So stay tuned. We love you guys. Thank you for doing this with us, making the world a more safe place to doubt, wrestle, struggle, be honest, and have conversations. It's so important. For now, we are your hosts. I am Adam Narlock.
And I'm John Williamson.
Grace and peace, everybody.
Call your name and you formed out of the emptiness. Call your name and I swear this time I'll be my best. Call your name and I felt home sweet home. May you find grace when overtaken by the tempest. May you find humor in the cynic and the pessimist. May you find faith in the great unknown. Lay it all down in a calm, safe space. And if the dream doesn't come, you just wait. And lay it all down in a calm, safe space. And if the dream doesn't come, you just wait. You just wait. We were made to walk through fire in our dance shoes. We were made to sail upon the meteors. We were made to love the heck out of our bones. us words, they were I love you, please, and thank you. God gave us thirst, and it's a hunger for the universe. No, 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 I'll never let you go. Sometimes this life's a lonely road. You gotta find it on your own. So build a happy ship, 'cause this living is a trip. You gotta sing the kind of song that you like singing. To the great unknown. God gave you feet so you could find your own way home. Let's run away, just know your troubles tend to follow. Pack your bags, just know that everything here's borrowed. Pathmaker's a trickster, so make your own damn road. Sing the kind of song that you like singing. Oh, no, 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 you never were alone. Sometimes this life's a lonely road. You gotta find it on your own. So build a happy ship, 'cause this living is a trip. You gotta sing the kind of song that you like singing. To the great unknown. To the great unknown.
The changing of seasons can affect how you feel. 1 in 5 people experience some form of depression, no matter the time of year.
At the American Psychiatric Association Foundation, our vision is to build a mentally healthy nation for all. Visit mentallyhealthynation.org to learn more.